Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Overnight from January 19th into January 20th, Russia launched one of its largest winter strike packages so far, combining ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, a hypersonic system, and massive drone swarms. This wasn't just another Shahed nuisance wave. This was a coordinated attempt to overwhelm air defenses and punch holes in Ukraine's energy system during deep winter. Kyiv took a direct hit again, along with multiple regions across the country. Power outages spread, heating systems went offline, and water supplies were disrupted in thousands of apartment buildings. If yesterday was about long outages becoming normal, today confirmed that Russia is comfortable making that suffering routine. What changed meaningfully from yesterday is how close these strikes came to nuclear risk, becoming a first-order issue instead of a background concern. Russian attacks damaged substations that supply off-site power to the Chornobyl nuclear site, cutting external electricity entirely for a period of time. This is now the second time in roughly a week that Chornobyl has lost off-site power due to Russian strikes. Ukrainian engineers restored it, but the repetition is the story. Ukrainian intelligence warned days ago that Russia was targeting transmission nodes tied to nuclear facilities. That warning wasn't theoretical. This was confirmation. Moscow's response hasn't evolved at all, which in itself is revealing. Russian officials dismissed the outage as insignificant, accused Ukraine of exaggeration, and leaned on state media to frame nuclear safety concerns as hysteria. This is the same Kremlin that has militarized the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant for years and caused repeated outages there. The message is consistent: deny risk, minimize consequences, and keep striking anyway. It's pressure warfare with plausible deniability baked in, even though everyone sees what's happening. The scale of the strike package also mattered in a way that builds on yesterday's conversation about sustainability. Russia launched hundreds of drones alongside missiles, and Ukraine intercepted most of them. But most still isn't all. One hypersonic missile made it through and struck infrastructure in central Ukraine, and debris from intercepted weapons caused damage in multiple urban areas. Kyiv officials said more than 1 million residents were affected by power cuts at the peak. This wasn't symbolic punishment. This was industrial-scale disruption. Ukraine's leadership put hard numbers on the defense side of the equation, which sharpens the story we started yesterday about math replacing maneuver. Defending against a single night of strikes cost Ukraine tens of millions of euros in air defense interceptors. New deliveries that arrived just days earlier clearly helped, but the imbalance remains brutal. Russia is launching relatively cheap drones in bulk, while Ukraine is forced to spend high-end interceptors to keep civilians alive. Yesterday, we talked about Ukraine's shifting doctrine to conserve missiles. Today, that shift looks less like innovation and more like necessity. Russia is also trying harder to show it can hurt Ukraine's military backbone, not just civilians. Russian drone units released footage claiming strikes on Western-supplied systems like HIMARS and Patriot components well behind the front line. Whether every claim holds up doesn't really change the intent. Moscow is probing, signaling, and trying to convince both Ukrainians and Western backers that even premium systems are vulnerable. Compared to yesterday's ground force updates, this is less about territorial movement and more about shaping perceptions. Ukraine hasn't stopped hitting back. Building on yesterday's reporting about strikes inside Russia, Ukrainian drones hit oil refineries and storage facilities again, including export-oriented sites in southern Russia. Fires broke out, operations were disrupted, and while Russian officials rushed to say everything was under control, the pattern keeps expanding. Ukraine is no longer just retaliating symbolically. It's deliberately targeting revenue-generating infrastructure to impose costs that go beyond the battlefield. Yesterday we talked about this trend. Today confirms it's not slowing. Diplomatically, the tone hardened further, not softened. As meetings continued around Davos, Russia used the moment to restate its most uncompromising positions. The foreign minister publicly rejected ceasefires outright and doubled down on demands for territory far beyond what Russia actually controls. This wasn't messaging for Kyiv. It was messaging for domestic audiences and for anyone still hoping Russia might trade escalation for talks. The answer, at least right now, is no. That contrast, talking in Switzerland while striking Kyiv, is even starker today than it was yesterday. Russian envoys described discussions with U.S. intermediaries as constructive, but nothing in Russia's military or diplomatic posture suggests flexibility. Ukraine, meanwhile, made clear again that it's not showing up to sign vague assurances. Binding security guarantees and real reconstruction commitments remain the bar. Yesterday's surreal tone is still here, just louder. On the ground, there weren't dramatic breakthroughs, which actually reinforces the broader picture. Russian forces continued grinding attacks across Kharkiv, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions with limited confirmed advances. Ukraine highlighted tactical successes using drones to restrict Russian movement near Kupiansk, expanding on what we discussed yesterday about denial zones. The takeaway isn't movement on the map. It's how the war is being fought. Drones everywhere, small assault groups, minimal armor, and constant attrition. What's new today is the clearer evidence that Russia is improvising under pressure. Ukrainian sources reported Russia using modified training missiles, originally meant for air defense, repurposed for ground strikes. There was also footage of an unmanned ground vehicle mounting thermobaric rocket launchers, essentially a robotic workaround for a system that's become too dangerous for crews to operate normally. Yesterday, we talked about adaptation under constraint. Today gave us visuals. Ukraine, in contrast, continued formalizing its own adaptation. The Defense Ministry laid out concrete plans to overhaul command structures, tie promotions and funding to measurable battlefield performance, and expand centralized mission control for drones and artillery. This builds directly on yesterday's discussion of interceptor drones and new air defense doctrine. Ukraine isn't treating drone saturation as a temporary problem anymore. It's reorganizing around the assumption that this is permanent. The decision to replace Chinese-made reconnaissance drones with a domestic alternative also gained more weight today. This isn't just about supply chains. It's about trust, data, and control in a war where sensors matter as much as shooters. Combined with the appointment of a new deputy Air Force commander focused specifically on integrating mobile fire groups and interceptor drones, the direction is clear. Ukraine is building a system designed to survive exactly what Russia is doing right now. Outside Ukraine, the spillover continued to widen. European countries arrested individuals accused of spying for Russia, including efforts to infiltrate drone manufacturers and track military movements. In Asia, authorities moved against a former Russian trade official accused of leaking industrial secrets. Cyber agencies in the UK warned again about sustained pro-Russian hacktivist attacks. Yesterday, these felt like side stories. Today, they feel like connective tissue. Reminders that this war isn't contained. Inside Russia, the domestic picture stayed bleak and tightly controlled. Industrial disruptions linked to energy instability mounted, a major airport sale failed to attract buyers, and repression continued to deepen. Messaging platforms were throttled in favor of state-linked alternatives, courts handed down long sentences, and the state showed zero interest in easing control ahead of elections. Yesterday, we talked about endurance over prosperity. Today reinforced that choice. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.